Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole in the 4th District of Oklahoma. This is another one of our weekly chats about what's happening in Congress. Actually, on the floor of Congress, not a lot happened this week. There were a couple of pieces of legislation, one of them which I was very pleased to vote for, providing protections for pregnant women at work. But again, these are not significant pieces of legislation in the sense of being big partisan fights or what have you. It was fairly calm on the floor, but a lot always happens in Washington, D.C. On a positive note, there was a very important meeting at the White House this week for the top leaders of both parties and the president to discuss a compromise infrastructure package, and the vibrations out of the meeting were good. There's certainly big disagreements. The president defines infrastructure in a very expansive way. The Republicans want to deal with infrastructure in the way that most people think about infrastructure: roads, bridges, waterways, ports, broadband, that sort of stuff. And I think that's probably where we're headed. I talked to a couple of senators that were at the meeting, and they felt like it was a positive beginning. The Republicans have also drawn a bright red line that they don't want major tax increases associated with this. They would prefer to finance through user fees and potentially reclaiming some of the money from COVID-19. There's a lot of money out there that's not being spent that could be repurposed and spent in ways that I think would be much more popular, quite frankly, with voters than some of the programs that were passed in the last COVID relief bill. So we'll see how it works out. But again, the discussions have begun. It's much more normal give and take than we've seen in the past. Hopefully, the two sides can arrive at a deal. Also, on the good news front, the Center for Disease Control announced that if you have the vaccine, you don't have to wear the mask anymore when you're indoors, and certainly not outdoors, except in very large groups and for very prolonged periods of time. So I take that as a good sign that we're moving in the right direction. Again, those of you that have not had an opportunity to get the vaccine, I would urge you to do that. I think that's very much in your interest personally, and in the interest of your family, and certainly in the interest of other people. But we are moving along on trying to get more people vaccinated. It has made a difference. You've seen a very precipitous drop in the deaths and hospitalizations associated with COVID, a slowing of the spreading of the disease. All those are good things. All of them depend very heavily on the vaccination. More people that get vaccinated, the better off we'll be. We also had the government, for emergency purposes, approve vaccinations for younger people, 12 to 16 years old. And that's a good thing. That means that'll make it a lot easier to make sure every school in America starts up in the fall and students are back where they belong, in school full time. It's better for them in terms of their learning. It's also better for them in terms of their psychological help and health well-being. And I'm very proud of most of our Oklahoma schools that managed to stay open really since last August. Not all of them, but the great majority of them did. That's been a good thing, and so a big shout out to the superintendents and teachers and support personnel that made that happen, and put the interests of those kids ahead of anything else. I think that speaks very well of them, and speaks very well of Oklahoma, that most of our students had an experience in school, in classrooms, that frankly many other American kids did not have this last year. I regret that. I think the scientific evidence here is pretty clear that young people can be in school safely. Again, I'm glad that our administrators, our teachers, our support personnel operated that way in most of Oklahoma, and I think long-term our young people will benefit from that. We also had some disturbing news along the border. That crisis continues to fester and get worse. We had a new record, 178,000 crossings last month. Those are the people that we actually apprehended. We don't apprehend everybody that comes across that border illegally. So another demonstration, honestly, that the reversal of the last administration's policies and the implementation of this administration's policies is simply not working in keeping our borders secure and making sure that we don't have an influx into the country that can't be handled and that really is extraordinarily expensive and extraordinarily dangerous. So I suspect there'll continue to be calls for the administration to reverse course and change its policies at the borders. I'm not sure that we're going to have much luck, but certainly I'm going to be pushing pretty hard in that area. On a personal note, I dropped a piece of legislation this week. Many of you will know something about the so-called McGirt Supreme Court decision that recognized for criminal justice purposes the presence of the Creek Reservation, and Oklahoma courts have now expanded that to include the Chickasaws, the Choctaws, the Cherokees, and the Seminoles. That creates law enforcement problems. At least two of our tribes would like to compact with the state to work through that problem. This legislation would allow those two tribes, the Cherokees and the Chickasaws, to do that. Others could join later if they chose to. We certainly would never try to force a tribe to do this. There's a division of opinion as to whether or not they need to do it, and we respect that. I would tell you that this is the start of a discussion. I would not tell you the legislation is likely to pass anytime soon, and it's likely to pass in this form. But somebody had to start the process of putting down legislative language and putting ideas on the table. We had hoped and still hope that the state and the tribes could come to the congressional delegation with a joint proposal where they were all on the same page. That would make it much easier to make legislation move. And certainly if the state of Oklahoma and the tribal governments of Oklahoma are on the same side, then it makes it pretty easy for the congressional delegation to champion that point of view. And it's much easier to move legislation. Until we reach that point, it's going to be difficult to move something. But again, the discussion needed to begin, and that's exactly what we did with this legislation. One of the things in Congress this week that bothered me the most is what we didn't do. This is actually Police Appreciation Week, and our police have gone through a very difficult time nationally. We've had a lot of political disturbances this last year. We've obviously, everybody's had to deal with COVID, but that complicates law enforcement a great deal. And of course, we've had some tragedies at the United States Capitol. So I think it would have been appropriate had we honored our law enforcement officials who have frankly done a heroic job in my view, and at least recognized all the things they've done. Hopefully in the near future we'll have something like that. Perhaps the issue of police reform is why we didn't bring legislation to the floor in this area. There's plenty of commemorative legislation out there, but there should have been some collective expression by Congress of appreciation for the work that men and women in uniform do all over the country each and every day. Work that's dangerous, work that's hard, but work that keeps the rest of us safe. So I'll just add my personal thanks to any man or woman that wears a uniform and has a badge or works in a support capacity for law enforcement. Thank you for the job that you do. Thank you for keeping all of us safe. And thank you for being willing to risk yourselves in the line of duty so that your fellow Americans can go about their business. It says an awful lot about your courage and your sense of self-sacrifice and service that you get up every day and do what's a very, very difficult job. So again, thanks very much. With that, I think I'll just close for the day, and I think we'll have a busier and more eventful week next week. But again, there's some good things happening. Please, if you haven't gotten vaccinated yet, please do that. Please continue to stay engaged, and hopefully we can begin to find common ground on infrastructure in the weeks and months ahead. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and hope to talk to you next week.